Okay, just taking a look at how I stiffen up the sides on the dump bed. So these 10 gauge sides are bent and they're pretty stiff, but on the sides it's nice to have a little stiffener. So I run that angle down. You can see I ran it down, have it stitched into place, tied in on the ends with a nice weld. Yeah, it really stiffens up the sides of the bed, gives us some support. Also, what I do is usually run a bar in between the stiffener and up underneath the rail. And this one I got a little bit of a different bar. It's bent. You can kind of see how it's got a curve to it. That's going to go up underneath that edge and connect on there on top of that little stiffener angle. You can kind of see that. What I do with those is I'll put two of those in the right dimension apart, and then you have a place to connect your bungee cords. So it kind of stiffens the top of the rail down to that stiffener angle, so it makes the whole side stiffer, but also then you have a nice place to put your bungee cords. Great storage for those. They're right there, nice and handy to use. So we'll just go around the front and take a look here on this bulkhead. What I'm going to do is take these angles that are sitting here and run them up in a Y shape. And it'll come down to here. You can see where the frame rail is welded, the penetration marks that came through the bulkhead from the welding will come up from here, where this is one of the stiff points of the bulkhead, and will come up in a Y pattern on both sides, and that'll stiffen up that bulkhead so it's not waving on top at all, which it really doesn't. I've had these on about 4 or 5 of the trucks I've built, maybe more, and because of that bend up there and it being 10 gauge and tied into the side rails, it's pretty stiff already. But I put those angles, 2x2 by 1/8 inch angle, up and run them to the top corners down to where the frame rail welds in a Y-shaped pattern, and it really stiffens that bulkhead up. Okay, here you can see we're on the other side of the truck now, and I'm going to put this stiffener angle on the side, just about the same place as the other one. Put it up on here, and we'll weld it in place. Stiffens up the side, just a basic angle, as you can see. Runs the whole length of the side rail, and we'll stitch that in, weld it on the ends, and it gives it a nice stiffener. And then we'll also put these in, and those stiffen up, connect here to here, and also have a place, like I said earlier, for putting the bungee cords on. So let's do that. Okay, here we are on the bulkhead on the front of the bed, and what I usually do on these is I'm going to put some stiffeners on in a Y-shaped pattern, and that'll stiffen up the top of the bulkhead. You can see it's got a little wave up there. It's 10 gauge with a bend in it up here, so it's pretty strong already. tied in on the two sides where the sides of the dump bed are, and of course it's tied in at the bottom. You can even see here the penetration marks from where it's welded to the frame rails on the inside, and of course the penetration marks from welding here to the sides of the dump bed. So the weakest areas are up here where you get a little bit of a wobble. We're going to go from a strong point, which is the end where the frame rail is welded to the bulkhead. You can see here, as I said, with the penetration marks. We're going to come up here into this open area like in a Y pattern, one on each side, and we're trying to go about right in between. We're going to shoot for the bottom of this bend here. That way we'll be between the side rail strong point where it's welded and the bend, and then we'll tie it in back here where the frame rail is. So you're kind of shooting right for the middle, which is the weakest part. And then it'll be a 2-inch angle we'll put on there, 4-foot piece, 2 of them in a Y-shaped pattern, and that'll stiffen this bulkhead up quite nicely. Okay, so now we're ready to put the rear hinge points on the frame of the truck itself, right on the frame rails. These are those parts that we made earlier in one of the other videos. You can see I got a step cut in there for going over the rivet, which is on the frame holding this cross member. So there's several rivets all over this frame. So just get a cutout. It slides over the top of that. Sits in the proper location, and then we'll tack it on, and then we'll weld it on. We'll put 2 good welds around there. We'll layer a couple welds. We got to be careful because of the fuel tank here. We're going to cover all that up with welding blankets. That's why I have some insulation here right now. I just started doing that. So, but this is where those will sit. One here, one over here, and when we get them in the right spots, the frame rails on the dump bed itself will fit between here. We'll have about 1/8 of an inch on each side. So it's a pretty good fit, not a lot of slop. We'll get these on here, get them welded in. And we have a nice strong attachment point for the rear pivot of the bed. When it gets lifted up by the cylinders, this is where it'll pivot. Okay, so here we are working on the dump bed still. Probably working on it day 15, 20 maybe, something like that. Had a lot of days where it wasn't able to work, so we're gonna keep trudging along here and try and get this thing over the hump. We're kind of in the area where we have a lot of geometry and engineering that has to be done, a lot of thinking, looking at it, and it really slows you down. You can get your steel and build and weld pretty fast when you have everything laid out and know exactly where it's going to be and what you want. But when you have to do layout and you have to figure out geometry of the lift itself and exactly how it's going to work and the stroke of your cylinders and all that, you have to be very careful, because you'll get it all put together and either the bed won't go up far enough to dump, or it won't come down and actually sit back on the frame rails because you have the cylinders set in the wrong place. There's lots of guys that have cylinders laying in their garage that they bought for projects that they laid them out wrong and they ended up having to buy different size cylinders. So we're going to try not to do that. We already have our cylinders right here. One of them's right behind me. 3-inch bore, 28-inch stroke on these. That's about what I figured out. I did a bunch of computations already, of course, before I bought them. Kind of had everything laid out and figured out what I needed. Did a lot of geometry layout on the truck, literally using 2x4s, and I can show you some of that in a little bit. But kind of lay out what the dump bed angle you want will be, how far apart everything has to be. And today we're going to talk a little bit about where the cylinders will mount. If you want to think of like where the cylinders will mount and push off of, like a push block, it's sitting right here. So I have some of it done already. You can see I have the connection points for the cylinders welded on already. These standoffs with the holes drilled in them, that's where the cylinders will mount on the bottom, and then they will mount to the dump bed itself on the top of the cylinder. And you can kind of see some of this right here. Looking at the push block, it's not welded on right now. We are going to actually weld this to the frame. I usually don't do that. I usually bolt everything down. Kind of did some research on these F550s and some of the frames. You weld in the right spot, weld along this bend of this frame channel right here. Plus this is actually a secondary piece which is riveted on top of the main frame. So you're not actually welding to the frame rail itself. This is like a double overlay, double frame piece that lays on top. It's riveted on, so we'll actually be welding to that, not right to the frame rail itself, which is good. Generally you don't want to weld vertical welds on this on the main frame rail on the web, which would be like this part. This is the overlay again. This is a good 1/4-inch overlay, second kind of a double frame that they put on these. If it was just a regular frame rail, you generally wouldn't want to weld verticals, especially between axles or weight points, which would be like between the two sets of wheels. This only has a single axle in the back, but if you had like a double axle, you wouldn't want to do that in between, kind of where the load centers would be. It just weakens the frame when you'd weld like a vertical like that. Also, it's generally not good to weld on the flange or the top or the bottom of the frame rail, or drill holes in those especially. So holes in the sides are probably okay. There's a lot of holes in them from the factory already. And if you have to add a couple more, just be careful where you put them. Don't put them too big, don't put them in the wrong spots, but kind of think it through. Keep your frame rail strong. But we're gonna weld to this one. This is the push block, like I said. We'll weld around here, and then the big weld will be on the ends right here, in a perfect spot really. It's right on the bend between the web and the flange. Put a long weld here, and I already have this beam cleaned up. What I used was a piece of beam that I cut the bottom out of and customized it to sit in the frame, so it sits down in the frame. So when the frame rail, the bed itself comes down and sits on here, everything will be the same height as it is where it's connected back at the pivot point, hinge points in the back. So you don't have a bed that's sitting one way or the other, ends up angled down or angled towards the front the wrong way. This has all been kind of figured out already with my hinge height back there and the actual height of the frame rails. There's a lot of stuff you got to figure out how that comes, sits on here, and then of course the bed's level with the truck, runs right with the frame rails. This is probably going to be within like a 1/16 of an inch or an 1/8 of an inch, which is fine. But anyway, I took a piece of beam that I had, and we take a look at this. Cut the bottom flanges off here and here, and that way it sits down on the frame nice and flat, and I ended up with the right height that I needed up here. When the bed itself actually comes and sits down on it, you can see these standoffs are welded on. Put a double pass on the outside. The ends are welded real well, so these are pretty strong. I've done these before. But this is where the cylinder will mount, and then of course push off and extend into the bed, which raises the bed. And of course you don't want this to move. So we'll put this back kind of where it's supposed to go. And we'll just kind of show you the layout a little bit. Here's one of the cylinders right here. Like I said, these are 3-inch. You're gonna have 2 of them. These are from Magister, just a brand that I happen to buy, had good luck with. Ordered them online. I think they come out of Europe. But anyway, you can see my pin centers right here, one in the front. Of course, this is the base of the cylinder. This is the rod of the cylinder where the cylinder will extend out. And this is kind of where they'll mount. So you kind of get a look right here how this sits. It'll sit there just like that. If we had a pin, we could slide it right in and have it right in here like this. But this one's just kind of for looks right now. There it'll sit. So these are 1-inch pins on these. Same size on both ends. The cylinder sits at a slight upward trajectory, which is what you want. When that pushes to open, you'd rather not have it be going sideways, if you know what I mean. You want to figure out the engineering when you do your bed so that sits a little bit up. 2x4 is set up to kind of show you where the cylinder will be when it's in an extended position, and where the bed itself will be, the bottom of the bed, where the frame rails, or the floor of the bed, pretty close to it anyway, will be, and it shows us the dump angle. So we're kind of looking at this ahead of time before we build it, like you should, and we kind of do a mock-up. So if you look here, this will be the cylinder in the extended position. This board is cut to the same length, plus a couple inches, so it sits down in here correctly, but it gives us a very close approximate to the extended length of the cylinder, which is about 64 inches. So when that cylinder is extended, how high will it lift the bed, and at what angle will the dump angle be? You want about 40 degrees dump angle. 40 to 50 is like kind of perfect. If you can get a little more than 40, that's great. You might have some things like grass, wet soil, stuff like that sticking there. But if you get anywhere above 40, you get around 45, especially if you get to 50, pretty much nothing's gonna stay in the bed. Nothing like rock, anything solid and dry, especially if you got wood, tree sections, things like that, anything you might haul in there. The things I always had problems with in all the years of trucks I owned with my business, like lawn and landscape business that I did, was like wet sticky grass or wet soil, clay. Otherwise you didn't have too many problems. But this is like a mock-up that shows us this long 2x4 is cut the same length that the bed is, 10.5 feet. So that would be like the bottom frame rail of the bed, and it's hooked, clamped on about exactly where it will be. The bed will overhang the rear hinge about 18 inches. So that's what we have there. It's pretty close, approximate height-wise on the hinge, where the pin will come through on the main hinge point in the back on the bed itself, and the bed will connect on those hinges you can see there. This shows you the bottom of the bed frame rail, and this is where the cylinder will be pushing up on it. So where exactly it'll be when it comes up and land, I don't know. It could end up a little lower, like down here, which would just push the angle up a little higher. Geometry affects everything. If this is higher, the dump angle will be less. If the connection point ends up down here a little bit, then the dump angle on that board or the bed, when the bed is on there, will be a little higher. But this gets us pretty close, gives us a good idea before we weld everything up, before we mount everything, that the bed's gonna work and that the dump angle of the bed will be correct. You wouldn't want to have it where you put it all together and it was real shallow and nothing comes out, and you didn't want it to dump or stand up too tall and then the rear might hit, let's say, near your drawbar, where your hitch will be and everything like that. You have that receiver plate with the hole, the drawbar goes in so you can tow things, stuff like that down there. If you get a little too vertical and you got a tail on your bed, it could come down and hit that. In this case, we should be good in both areas. But this just gives you an idea. Like I said, this board here is showing you where the bed frame rails will be, and the angle of the bed when it's at the cylinder is at full extension. So this is the cylinder, that's the dump bed. Kind of gives you a look. When we put the, got one of these little handy dandy, I don't know what you want to call it, but shows the degrees of things. You take it out of level, put it on the bed, and we're at about 46 to 47 degrees, which is pretty good. It's actually just about perfect. You don't need it any taller than that, any more of a severe angle for things to come out of it. I have a dump trailer at home and another, my chipping truck for doing tree work, just chip into, and that only dumps at about 38 degrees. So in my dump bed on my dump trailer only goes to about 40. So this one's real good. This one's at about 45, 46, 47 roughly. And that's gonna be a real good angle for dumping. Everything should come out pretty good. Okay, so here's the bed mounted. We just used the excavator and the jib crane inside to mount this, do a trial fit. Just get it on there, get a look at it. She's out in the sun for the first time ever. Looks pretty good. Now you can kind of see the height and just its position on the truck. A lot of things to do yet, but you get an idea. Here you can see how it sits back off that rear hinge point. It's about 18 inches, which is good. It also helps cantilever the load. Even though it's just 18 inches, it's better than nothing. A lot of the dump beds you see, they're actually hinged all the way on right on the end, which doesn't assist the hoist at all. So cylinders have a little easier time if there's even a little bit of load on the other side of the teeter-totter, so to speak. But there it is. As you can see, it's usually by steel and it starts to rust. Got a dehumidifier running in the shop and it still does that. So on the other side I treated with some of that navel jelly and it just made a bigger mess, I think. But so here's a look at the back. I think we already looked at some of these videos where I built the gates, the doors in the back, and then this latching system, which works pretty well. It's pretty simple. You can see all that. It just lifts up, goes against that spring compression, and then it just pops back down when you slide it in, line it back up. The doors kind of line into each other. As you can see, one fits into the other. Here's a look inside the bed. The cross members, remember back, those are pallet racking that I cut the ends off of and touched up some of the welds, the Chinese welds on them. You can see that. Everything is, of course, going to get painted, primed and painted and cleaned up. But the reason the one in the middle is missing at the connection point for the cylinders is just for ease of work. Be able to get in there, hook things up, etc., all along the way here, and then pretty soon come up here I will put that last one in, which sits almost, you can even see some of the markings on the frame rails maybe in the I don't know if this shows on the camera, but there's one more cross member that's going to go right above where that push bar is. You can see there where the cylinders are going to hook up. So here's a look at the passenger side. So I'm pretty happy with it so far. Got a lot of work to do. I wanted to get it to sit down a little lower for working height off the back of the bed or whatever, but believe it or not, the way the frames are on these and everything's tucked inside the frame from the factory, the fuel tank and all the other stuff, you really can't set it any lower down than what I did. I even made some efforts to chop a ½ inch off here and an inch off there, and it worked, but it's still up. Not any higher than any of my other trucks, but it's, or any truck you would probably buy, but I like to get that bed height, the floor of the bed, down as low as I can, just, you know, jumping in and out and shoveling stuff out of the back, etc. Not a big deal for a 550 because you'll be hauling a lot of bigger crap generally, and you know, you're not going to be up inside the bed all that much, but doing landscape jobs or whatever you might. So I'm going to have some fenders that go right above the wheels. They're left over from another job. I'm going to probably end up recycling those, or for a truck that they never got mounted on, like 15-20 years ago almost. I still have those brand new. Probably mount those over the center of the wheel there. Of course, we got to weld some mounts for mud flaps, one on each side of the bottom of the bed. There's a lot of stuff to do. Take that lift lug off at some point, and the bulkhead. There's the bulkhead here. In the space here, there's going to be a cabinet. It's going to be pretty skinny. I really left not enough room for it. I wish I would have left a little more, but at the same time, then the bed would either be smaller or it would hang off the back more, which I really didn't want it to extend more than 18 inches, because then you run into problems with your drawbar and pulling trailers and stuff like that with the bed being extended off the back too much. So I've only got about 18-19 inches here, that because of the space you need when the bed comes down, geometry wise, at a little bit of an angle, you need to leave an inch or so on the front, an inch between the cab and the cabinet. So really only gonna have like 16-inch cabinet in there. Tall and skinny and long, but it would be better not and throw shovels and everything else in there, a blower, a trimmer, whatever I need. But anyway, yeah, this is the first time it's been outside. Just mounted it right now, as you probably saw in the video. And It looks pretty good. And there it is. All for $100,000 at your local dealer, or you can build one yourself.